What happens when a two-person engineering team uses AI to create a custom project management tool but doesn't update the specs as they change? Today on the operating room, we'll dissect exactly what happens in that case. We'll talk about a junior PM who's being asked to manage risk from the sidelines. And then finally, we'll talk about a artist turned project manager who's struggling to help the team get out of the starting gates on a startup project. So today, let's get into the first case, which I'm calling Hyper Hubris. And this post on Reddit was titled, "As a small team, I just think small teams don't need PM SaaS tools anymore." My friend and I have been building a small project for the past 2 months and went through completely different project management setups. Before this, I was a startup founder of a 10 plus member team. Back then, our team used Linear. I loved it, best in class UI, in my opinion. But over time, I just found that we went to the linear UI less and less. The advantages that I used to appreciate about it became worthless because we just managed those tickets with MCP anyway. Unfortunately, my startup did not work out. This time, when my friend and I started, it was just the two of us. We didn't go back to linear as the sleek UI stopped mattering to how we actually worked. But we went further. I vibed an agent to fully run an HTML based board. I use the agent to update tickets, flag stale ones. The agent can even send PR fixes when docs drift. For a few weeks, it worked. Then it quietly stopped working. Not because the agent was lazy, but because as the specs and tickets kept growing, they lacked structure and a real life cycle like an API has. Whenever we changed a project decision, the old one never really left. Residue of outdated documentation, decisions, and specs accumulated, eventually confusing the agent. So we moved the underlying tracking to plain GitHub issues instead. It's free and we use GitHub anyway. It has everything I needed: basic ticket tracking with a real life cycle. I don't like the plain GitHub project view, so we kept the vibed beautiful HTML board, which syncs with the GitHub issues underneath. I genuinely think as a small team, we don't see the case for a PM SaaS anymore. But we are a two-person all engineer team anyway, so it is probably different at bigger teams. The uh, the irony with this one is hard to miss. It's amazing that we start a post by saying that um, nobody needs PM SaaS tools on small teams anymore, but we custom built one from scratch basically three different times or two different times. It's pretty ironic. So let's get into it. What's the first problem? For me, the first problem is the time and resources wasted on building redundancy in a startup, right? So time and resources are probably your most valuable assets in a startup. And we had this linear tool, which supposedly is this best in class UI, and and we decided that we were going to build an AI based UI tool because we didn't like it, or actually an AI based PM tool first because we didn't like it. Then we moved into an AI UI on top of GitHub, and so we're just building redundancy on top of redundancy on top of redundancy in a startup, which doesn't make sense. Why did this PM do this? Well, I think they did it because they couldn't accept best in class and they wanted greatest of all time. And that's a huge pitfall in a startup like this. Is the reality is good enough is good enough. If you call something best in class, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. That's enough. Just move on. And in this case, linear for a two-person team would have been completely free. So it's not a cost problem at all. Problem two, the custom AI solution kept breaking. Well, the reason it kept breaking was because the requirements were poor because we never updated them, right? So, I mean, the reality is we heard this in the post, which is, well, it worked for 3 weeks, and then as we changed our decisions, there were all these residual issues. Well, of course there were, because you're not updating it. So, I mean, the agents are only as good as what you put into them, and in this case, you're not updating it, so you're putting garbage in and you're getting garbage out, right? And that's just how it works. Just really poor. If you want to use an AI agent, you got to keep up with it. You can't just say, oh well, this isn't working. Well, of course it doesn't work because you're not giving it the input that it needs to get the output that you want. And then finally, problem three is the current customized tool is not scalable, right? So the root cause here is we decided to create a unknown solution that nobody has ever used before for a team of two people. So presumably this startup will go well and they'll start hiring people, and we have a situation where nobody's going to know how to use it. Maybe it's intuitive, maybe it is the greatest of all time as this person set out to create, and nobody will need a tutorial, but I think there's a reasonable chance they will. And it really makes it very difficult to do it. And the other reason it's not scalable is this same issue. So obviously with UI, you're not as constrained as you would be with like the underlying tasks the way they were. But as you grow, you're going to probably want more fields. You're going to want more columns, different columns. Well, you're still going to have to go back and redo that in the agent anyway. So it's just not a very scalable solution on any front when it comes to number of people and when it comes to the technology itself, as far as being able to change it. There's nothing customizable about it from what we heard in there. It's not like a ClickUp, for example, where you can just add columns, remove columns. We didn't hear any of that. So just not scalable at all. So how do we fix this problem? So for me, I think going forward, anyone in this position, in a startup position, has to look at everything from a cost benefit perspective. So in this case, the cost of making this custom tool after we identified something that was best in class is hard to articulate. We have, what did we spend? 40, 80 hours on these solutions when we had something that we called best in class. It makes no sense. And so, what is the cost? Well, maybe the cost is just this person's time, but the opportunity cost is massive, right? That time could have been spent on features, on the product. And that's what is going to ultimately pay for everything. So it just is a really, really have to do a cost benefit really in everything that you do when you're in that kind of position, when you have finite resources and time. The second solution I would offer is, I think the mindset here has to be changed to realize that what the tracked work looks like doesn't matter, just that it's tracked. Right? It doesn't matter if it's pretty, if you think it's pretty, or if the other engineer on the team thinks it's pretty. Who cares? Just get it on the board. Just make sure it's there. Just make sure you're tracking it. Make sure you can see it. Make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure both are aligned. Who cares if it's pretty? It's only the two of you. Who cares? And if it's a team of 4 or 5, I would still argue it doesn't matter that much. So, for me, I think we're just completely in the wrong mindset when it comes to this. It doesn't matter. This isn't the product that we're building from what we understand here. So why are we so worried about it being pretty? And then finally, the third solution I would offer is, at this point, it sounds like they're going to keep this custom solution. So I think you should create a guide for new hires, since nobody will be familiar with it. So, just because you think it's beautiful and you think it's easy to use doesn't mean at all that somebody else will think that. So I think that's what I would do here. It's just unfortunate that all this time was spent on a tool that is for two people. It just doesn't make a lot of sense when you're in a startup context. All right, let's get into case number 2 for today, which is sensory deprivation. I was recently brought on within the past few months at my current position, and one of the first major items given to me was the risk management for my project. I have been getting up to speed project-wise and trying to stay on top of adding risks, updating risks, and following up with relevant parties for updates, but I feel like a glorified email reminder. Being that I'm still new and under a senior, I'm not in every technical meeting yet, so it feels hard to translate the day-to-day items to feeling like risks are being mitigated. Any insight on how you deal with risk management is appreciated. So, first reaction on this one is, I feel really terrible for this person. They are being put in a really tough spot where, they're being essentially relegated to the sidelines and told to manage risks that they are receiving in a way that is really difficult, right? And the way they're getting them is somebody's telling them they're at risk, they put it on their log and they follow up. That's really a very lagging indicator. That's really a difficult spot. So I feel really bad for this person that they've been put in this position. So let's go through it. So first problem is exactly what they said. We'll take that. This PM is feeling like a glorified email reminder, And the reason for that is they're they're being put into this role by the senior PM and the management. This is the structure that they designed. And this is a failure by the senior project manager who, I would hope that most senior project managers would realize that you can't manage risk this way effectively. Sure. I mean, I think that the thought process is, well, they'll just keep the risk log and we'll tell them the risks. But that's, like I said, that's a lagging indicator that doesn't work. And I'm really surprised that whoever that senior PM reports to, whether that's a PMO or whatever that is, I'm surprised they would allow this as well. It's just not a way to set this person up for success, and it's not a way to set up the risk management function for success. Second problem is that the PM is struggling to translate the daily work into risk mitigation and risk management. Well, of course. The reason for that is because they don't have any of the appropriate context because they've been excluded from most of the technical meetings, or at least many of the technical meetings. So, it might be a situation where the senior PM thought, well, they don't need to be in all the meetings, maybe 80% of it, 90% of it is not really relevant to them. Bring them into the meetings. That 5%, that 10%, that's where the risks translate. That's where they can start to hear things. That's where they can start to infer things. That's how it works, right? Somebody coming to me and telling me, hey, Matt, this is a risk. That's too late, right? I should, as a PM who's been doing this for 16 years, I should know way ahead of somebody telling me what's a risk, and I should have it on my radar. That's where I think this person is really being left out on the sidelines, right? They can't do that because they're not being included in the work, in the meetings, in the group chats to be able to effectively do their job. And the third problem, I think, is the biggest one, is that organizationally, risk management is a massive risk in this project, right? And the reason is that risk can't be managed by a bystander who has no context and is being told what the risks are, right? So what we just talked about in the last problem and root cause diagnosis was, okay, well, somebody comes to me and tells me a risk is a lagging indicator. That's exactly right, right? So, when somebody else, probably the person responsible, realizes it's a risk, it might be too late, right? And it's not necessarily, but a lot of people, they'll struggle with something for like a day or two, and then they'll realize, oh no, I really thought I could do this, but I can't. Well, that's something, me personally, I would have identified on day one. I would have identified on day one where, hey, this person hasn't done it before. They're struggling with it. They were supposed to finish it today, or excuse me, yesterday, and it's today, it's not done. That's a risk, right? And I would have been 2 days ahead of somebody coming forward and saying, hey, this is a risk. So, huge organizational problem for me here. I think they're just, it's really setting themselves up for a catastrophe, really, in my opinion. All right. So before I explain how I would fix this, I want to mention some of the comments that were made on Reddit, because it's a really stark contrast into how I see this one. And I'm not saying I'm right and they're wrong. And I'm not saying that at all. I just think it's really interesting. And I'll explain why I disagree with a lot of these comments. So, the most popular comment, the one that got the most upvotes, was this: make it clear in writing that individual contributors are responsible for risk log review. Assign owners in the risk log. Add a risk section with a link to the risk log in your coordination minutes, and review risks on your own before your coordination calls, where you can remind concerned contributors of upcoming relevant risks. It's not a separate process. It is integrated in your coordination process. That eliminates superfluous emails. So my reaction to that is, that's all fine and well if you're being included in the meetings, but they're not, right? So all of this goes out the window. And I think the first half of that is not really relevant, because from everything that I heard in that original post by this junior PM, it sounds like the documentation side of the risks is all captured, right? They're capturing the risks, they've identified them, and they're reaching out and following up. But the problem for me here is they shouldn't be having to chase via email. Now, again, to an extent, are you always going to have to chase via email? Maybe. You're probably going to have to chase risks in some way, shape, or form. Well, I shouldn't say probably, almost always. But the problem for me is the identification piece of this, right? Is this isn't a problem of well, this person doesn't have a risk section in their risk log, right? And they're not assigning owners. Well, they've assigned owners. The owners are the people that they're emailing. So for me, this one just, the first half of it I think is already done, and the second half just doesn't land because they're not in these meetings. There's not an opportunity for them to surface them. The second comment that really jumped out to me, and this comment actually was made 3 times. I think this had like 15 or 18 comments, and this one was very common. It is the R in your RAID log. It needs to have a measure of impact and probability, remediation plan, assignee, and potential impact date. On a scheduled basis, i.e., a status meeting, you as the PM need to request updates on any risk that potentially may happen in the coming period of time. Again, so, RAID log, this is just buzzword stuff, right? So this person actually, I think they commented later on in the thread and said, oh, I'm a PMP instructor. Well, that's clear because the RAID log is a very PMBOK tool. And again, and for those unfamiliar, it's risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. Now, again, most of us who've been at this for a while, we keep a risk log. Assumptions can be documented at times in certain places where I think it's necessary. And dependencies, I don't keep a dependency log. I keep that in the actual tool that I'm using. So whatever that is, whether that's ClickUp or back in the day it was Project, whatever it is, I put my dependencies in there, or Jira. Put the dependencies in there. I think that's the more effective place for them. But in any event, we're starting off by telling this person that it's the R in their RAID log. Well, they know that. They're already documenting the risks. Then we talk about all these columns. Do the columns really matter? No, I don't think they do. In this case, I think it sounds like this person has a functioning risk log, risk register. I think everything that I've gathered from this is it's perfectly functional. So then the second part is similar to the first comment, right? Is at a status meeting, you need to request updates on any risk. Well, they're not included in the meetings. That's the problem. And it was you as the PM need to request. Well, this person, that the original poster here, is a junior PM. They're under a senior PM, so they're not running these meetings from what we can gather. Right. So all this just goes out the window. It doesn't land for me. I don't think this is effective advice for this person. So what is effective advice for this person? Well, in my opinion, is the first thing I would do is speak with the senior PM and respectfully suggest that you'd be a lot more effective at your job if you were included in all communication relevant to the project, all the chat groups, and all the meetings. And if that person says, hey, if that senior PM says, hey, I don't think you need to be in everything, you say, well, I understand that, but respectfully, I'm perfectly fine with it. If it's not relevant, that's no problem, but it really would help me do my job more effectively and it would help me learn. And that's it. And I think you really need to do that. And there's just no other way to get around it, in my opinion. If that doesn't happen, right? If the senior PM, and honestly, if the senior PM said no, I would ask my manager about it. If I was in this junior PM's situation, but let's assume that it gets turned down. What I would do is I'd start asking more questions, and I'll be honest, I think that's probably easier said than done because I'm guessing that these people that this junior PM is emailing are probably not thrilled with the questions to begin with because they're like, well, we already talked to the senior PM about this and why don't you know it, right? So, or we talked about this in this meeting that you weren't in. So I'm sure they're not thrilled about it. It's understandable, right? I can't blame those people for not being thrilled about it. But I think what you need to do is ask more questions generally about the project is, really start thinking about it critically instead of just kind of carrying out this. And I'm not blaming this PM at all. They are put in a really bad position here. But I think trying to get more information, and as you start peeling that onion, the layers of that onion back, then you'll start to see where some of those risks are. And again, easier said than done, but that's what I would do. But what I would think would be even more effective here would be getting access to what's being built. So I don't know what type of project this is, but I think getting access to it, being able to see the product and testing it would fill in a lot of gaps for this PM because it's a whole different ball game when somebody's telling you, hey, We're working on an issue on the homepage where users can't log in versus me as a PM going and looking at that page and seeing five other things that are broken, right? Then all of a sudden, the risk to me becomes, okay, this has gone from low to medium or medium to high. And in that case, it would be probably from medium to high that the homepage is completely broken. That's a high risk. How are we fixing it? That's where, in my experience, that has helped me immensely is get ahead of risks. Is if I can see it, I can feel it, I know what it's supposed to be, then all of a sudden it makes a lot more sense to me. And I'm way ahead of somebody telling me a risk, right? Nobody has to tell me that risk because I knew what the risk was the minute that I got my hands on it. So again, is that always practical? No, but it is a very helpful strategy in my opinion. And then finally, what I would do, again, assuming the structure stays in place, is I would move from email reminders to task assignments. So I would get the these risk follow-ups, get them into whatever project management tool they're using, and then just start assigning these out. So if it's something where, hey, you're waiting on a vendor to respond to a person and you're following up with that person, just put that in a task. The task is follow up with vendor ABC and identify the status of whatever is being waited on. That's it. And then you can just track it. Then it's a lot easier and it's right within the normal workflow, right? You're not asking for much extra effort like you would be for an email. Again, it's not a huge difference, but I think it would make things a lot easier. And it keeps the work all in the same place, which I'm a big advocate of. All right, let's get into the third case for today, which is overprescription. All right. Hey guys, I've started my first ever proper game project with a small team. And as this is my first time in a project lead position, I was looking for some advice on how to best manage a group of different disciplines. I am a game artist, so I'm a lot more familiar with the artist pipeline, but my team also consists of programmers and a sound tech. Currently, I'm using a burn down chart and a macro chart to help delegate tasks and scope, but I'm still finding myself a bit lost on how to manage the team and give everybody the details they need. This week, I'm looking to meet with each discipline separately to get an idea of their pipelines. But if anyone has advice or has other management strategies I should look into, I would love to hear it. And then this person explained they're working on a 2D indie detective story mystery game in Unity. So that's sounds like a pretty cool project. I worked on a bunch of Unity projects some years ago as well, and that sounds fun. All right, so what are the problems here? So I think that the first problem is what we heard, which is that the PM is lost on how to give the team what they need. And the reason I think for that is a few, but the main one that jumps out to me is that the current tool set isn't giving enough detail, right? So this PM doesn't have enough detail to be able to construct tasks and assign them out to people. And the tool set is a burn down chart and a macro chart, which is essentially a quasi Gantt chart. Well, those aren't tools that help teams. Those aren't tools that give you a level of detail that a team member needs to be able to work, right? So, burn down chart, for those unfamiliar, just takes some measure of the work. So, usually like story points. So, if an epic is like 1,000 story points, the burn down would show you, okay, we've done 200, we have 800 left. That doesn't help the team. That just shows them progress, which at this stage I don't think is particularly helpful. So that's the root cause here is this PM doesn't have enough detail to be able to give them what they need because the tools they're using don't allow for it. Second problem is the PM is unclear of the pipeline of the other team members, and I think we heard that, and I credit this PM because one, they're doing the right thing now, which is asking for help, and two, meeting with the other teams to understand their pipeline. So that's great. But I think the reason that they're in this position kind of later in the game is because they've prioritized optics over the basics. And the optics are the burn down, and optics are the Gantt. Whereas the basics are, okay, let's get an idea of what we're doing and who's doing what first, right? And then worry about the structure and worry about the visuals, right? And I think that's what kind of fell behind here. And then finally, the struggle to assign tasks is the third problem. And the root cause there is pretty simple. We touched on a little bit, which is that the process hasn't been defined, nor do we have things at a sufficient level of detail, right? We have high level things on that Gantt or that macro chart, but we don't have any low level things that people can actually tackle, right? So we might have something of build a haunted house, right? Um, but we don't have the tasks of create the doors, create the windows, create a table, create a scary character. All those things are missing, right? And that's the problem. All right. How would I fix this one? So first, I would start. The basics for me are basic Kanban board. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can use something as simple as Asana or Trello, but we just need to get the basics there. And what I would do at the same time is make that Gantt internal only. I would stop really surfacing it to the team. I don't think it's really a helpful tool for them. And I would completely abandon the burn down. We have a small team, sounds like 4, maybe 5 people. And I don't think we need to worry about a burn down at this phase of maturity in the project and the company. So that's where I would start. And then really once you kind of have the board it's a matter of understanding the workflow, what should be worked on, breaking that work down and executing it. So we touched on this a little bit when we were covering the problems and the root causes, but really we just need to take what we have on that Gantt, break it down again, and then probably break it down one more time, and then we get our tasks, right? And then everybody's off and running. And not only is everybody off and running, but then this PM's concerns are solved because they have this whole backlog of stuff to assign to people. Now, again, some might say, "Oh, you need a product function." We're talking about a team of 4 people here, so we're not too worried about formal product functions. This is just a bootstrap startup making an indie game. So we're trying to be as practical as possible rather than sticking to textbook principles. And generally speaking, we always try to stick to practical as possible because I think that's the most effective way to do things. So then the third solution I would offer would be, right now, I would just focus on getting in regular commits and regular builds. So in a software development scenario like this, let's just get the work flowing. Let's see what that work looks like and go from there and iterate. Get a build, get something that people can play and see. Can we get that haunted house and have people be able to navigate around it in their editor, or ideally preferably in a build, right? And that I think is the place to start. Eventually, great stretch goal is getting into some formal cadence with a sprint. But right now, I wouldn't worry about any of that, right? I would worry about right now. Let's just get started. Let's just get moving. We're not at a point where we even really know what everybody's doing yet. We don't know what their process looks like, and that's what this PM is trying to solve. So that's how I would approach it. All right, so let's kind of quickly recap today. What did we learn that we can apply in our project? So the first one in this case of hyper hubris, I think the lesson for me is just how precious time is. And time is precious in life. Time is precious in work, and time is really precious in a startup. And I think that got completely lost here in the quest for finding the greatest of all time instead of best in class. And so for me, it's just how valuable time is. Good enough is good enough. Case 2 was the sensory deprivation, and for me, it's this one I think is just a reminder of how important leadership is, and it's disappointing to me that the senior PM is putting this junior PM in this position because I think it's really an unfair position for them. And it's really just disappointing, and I think we just have to always try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, and there's no reason to exclude this person from meetings. Why are we doing that? What are they harming by just sitting in on a meeting? If you're concerned about them interjecting too much, just say, hey, if you don't mind, you know try to take a little more of an observer role. I mean, you can do that if you really have to. I personally would not do that, but if that's the reason for excluding them, then fine. But Again, what I take from this is that we have to really be mindful of the positions that we're putting people in, whether that's a senior PM, whether that's a manager. We have to think through um, the role for them, what's best for the person, and what's best for the company, right? So here, I think it's a miss on both counts. This is a horrible position for this PM, and it's a horrible position for the risk management of the company. So we just have to always be aware of the positions that we're putting people in, and the positions that we're putting our projects in. And then finally, case three, which is overprescription. The obvious lesson there is just keeping it simple, right? And I know that's cliche, but when you're starting up, you don't have to worry about pretty things and making everything perfect, like a burn down chart. Let's just get moving, and then introduce the formality, then introduce the process. But when resources and time are limited, let's just get moving. Let's get something tangible that we can share with an investor or share internally to boost morale. And I think that's unfortunately just kind of overshot with that burn down in particular. And I would argue probably that Gantt too. So that's all for today. I appreciate you listening. If you have any feedback, always welcome to send that to pmor@ilariansolutions.com. I appreciate your time and hope you have a great day. Take care.